Gemini 9 was supposed to launch in May of 1966, but they ran into trouble when their Agena target rocket, the Atlas Agena, exploded during launch. And so Stafford and Cernan had been sitting in their Gemini capsule waiting to launch after it, and had to climb back out and endure a postponement of their mission. After that, the NASA managers decided to use an alternate, smaller target rocket called the Augmented Target Docking Adapter. And so they rescheduled the mission for June. The ADTA, as it was called, was all set to be launched on June 1st. It was launched successfully, but there was a problem at the last minute with the Gemini's computers talking to the computers in the Launch Control Center, and so they scrubbed the launch yet again and rescheduled it for June 3rd, 1966, when they finally launched successfully, and Tom Stafford and Gene Cernan went into orbit. They chased down the ADTA, and when they caught up to it, they discovered that, unfortunately, its protective shroud had not separated properly. It was still attached by a metal strap that was keeping it from opening and separating. And to Tom Stafford, it looked like an angry alligator. It was rotating and spinning, and you didn't want to get too close to it because they were afraid that it might bang into the Gemini. There was some talk about maybe having Gene Cernan go out on one of his planned spacewalks and try and dislodge the shroud, but that was not greeted very well by NASA managers. And so what they ended up doing was just using the ADTA as a rendezvous target without the docking. So Stafford, who was something of a rendezvous ace at this point, having co-piloted Gemini 6, did several different kinds of rendezvous, demonstrating techniques that could be used during the lunar orbit rendezvous planned for Apollo. Well, then it was Gene Cernan's turn to be center stage, and he had a very ambitious spacewalk planned in which he was supposed to go back to the adapter, the back end of the Gemini, and climb into a special rocket-powered backpack with hot gas jets, not compressed nitrogen or anything like that, but actual hot-firing rocket engines. And in fact, his spacesuit, the pants of his spacesuit were covered with woven stainless steel fabric to prevent these rocket jets from burning a hole through his spacesuit. So pretty sporty stuff. Cernan got outside, and you can see him on the right there trying to experiment with controlling his orientation and his position by pulling on his long umbilical, and found that that was a lot harder than they thought it would be. Well, he made it back to the adapter after that, and found that it was also much harder to get into this astronaut maneuvering unit, this flying backpack. He had to work very hard to, for example, unstow its arms, which had little control levers on them. He had not adequate restraints to keep his body in position to work in zero gravity. He got very tired out. The suit, of course, was very stiff and hard to bend, and Cernan found himself so tired out, and he found that his visor, he was working so hard that his environmental control system on this special chest pack that you see there on the left, that could not remove all the moisture in his breath. So his visor started to fog over to the point where he couldn't see. He was barely able to, they scrubbed the attempt on flying the backpack. They left it back in the adapter. Oh, and I forgot to mention that communications were also absolutely terrible while he was back there. So all in all, it was a very bad situation. Stafford called him inside. He was able to barely make it back to the cabin of the Gemini, and then he had a terrible time compressing his pressurized suit down enough to close the hatch of the Gemini and reseal the cabin. It ended up being very painful, and by the time they got the cabin pressurized and he got his spacesuit helmet off, he was beet red. Stafford had to squirt water at him to keep him from getting heat stroke, and he was utterly exhausted. And what everyone realized was that Ed White's seemingly trouble-free spacewalk back in Gemini 4 had given everybody a false sense of security about spacewalking. Turns out that working in a stiff pressurized suit in the three-dimensional ice rink of zero gravity was much more difficult than anybody had expected. Gemini 10 flew in July 1966 with veteran John Young commanding and Mike Collins, a rookie, as co-pilot. And this time they were able to get their Regina airborne without any trouble. And Young and Collins launched right after that and chased down the Regina. And although the rendezvous cost them more fuel than they had anticipated, they did manage to find the Regina and dock with it successfully. They also did a first in firing the Regina's big rocket engine to boost their orbit to a new altitude record of 475 miles above the Earth. Certainly a spectacular view from there. They then, after quite a few hours at that altitude in a kind of a big elliptical orbit, they recircularized their orbit down to about 300 miles, and 39 hours after their docking, they separated from the Regina, and they went off on a new rendezvous looking for the old Regina from Gemini 8 mission, which had been left in orbit. Recall that the problem with Gemini 8 was not with the Regina, but was with the Gemini, and so the Regina was stable during those months, although it was inert at this point. And it was a target for Mike Collins to go out on his second spacewalk. He'd already done one stand-up spacewalk while they were docked to the original Regina, just standing up in the hatch of the Gemini. But this time he had a long umbilical cord, and he had a maneuvering gun, much like Ed White's from Gemini 4, and it was attached by a special line to the adapter section of the Gemini, which powered it with nitrogen. And he pushed his way out of the cabin and floated over to the Regina. He had some difficulty holding on to the Regina and had to try a couple of times before he got a good handhold near the docking collar. Was able to retrieve a package called a micrometeorite collection experiment from the side of the Regina, which had now, of course, been in space for several months, and then carefully pulled his way hand over hand back to the cabin of the Gemini. He didn't end up making that much use of the gun, and found in general that, again, like Gene Cernan before him, that working in that stiff pressurized spacesuit, working in the environment of zero-G, turned out to be more challenging, more difficult, and more tiring than he had expected. Well, now it was Gemini 11's turn in September of 1966, and their big goal was to achieve a rendezvous in only one orbit. You can see on the left there the rendezvous scheme used by Gemini 6 and by subsequent missions. Really took quite a while. It took several hours and several orbits to gradually catch up with the target. And the Gemini 11 approach on the right was to conduct the rendezvous in only a single orbit. This would be a very valuable technique that could also be applied to Apollo. It meant split-second timing. They only had a 2-second launch window once the Regina was airborne. The Gemini crew, Pete Conrad and Dick Gordon, only had a 2-second launch window in which they could lift off and be able to reach the Regina in a single orbit, and they made that successfully only half a second into that launch window. And indeed, they did achieve their single orbit rendezvous, which was another important milestone for the Gemini program.